You've played down our expectations for tax cuts in the budget that is coming, but you've talked a lot about wanting to incentivise investment to get the economy growing. So let me start on investment. The corporate tax rate is going to go up by 6 percentage points in April. At the time that was announced, there was a lot of talk about specific reliefs that could be introduced to sort of soften the blow there. Is that something that you're going to be leaning on to try and encourage investment in the UK?
Well, at the moment, we don't have the headroom for major tax cuts, but if I was going to prioritise where I would like to see tax cuts, it would be business tax cuts that give us, as I said in the speech, even more competitive tax rates. It's important to say, Anna, we have the second lowest business taxes as a proportion of GDP amongst major countries. So the UK is already very competitive, but we want to do better. And we recognise that taxes are part of the incentive structure that companies react to when they decide where to invest. And my message this morning is very simple. If I was choosing where to invest out of all the different places you can go in the world, when you look at Britain's strengths in green industries, in creative industries, in life sciences, in technology, I would choose Britain. OK,
so you want to incentivise investment in Britain. The truth, though, in recent years is that investment has been lagging behind the G7 average, and not just the G7 average, but all members of the G7. So what can you do to try and close that gap? You've ruled out big tax cuts, so what are the levers that you would look to be pulling?
Well, I talked about the 4 pillars of my plan to improve our productivity. And if we deliver on that, if we become the most productive, as well as the most entrepreneurial country in Europe, I think we're already the most entrepreneurial, but this would make us the most productive, then I think that will make a very compelling case for investment. And that's why I outlined the plan. I think we've got a very exciting vision. I think we have the opportunity with our universities, our financial services, and our technology strengths to be a Silicon Valley. And I think that if I can make that happen, then I think this is the place people are going to want to invest.
That's what you want to encourage, to make a new Silicon Valley here. So are you looking at specific tax reliefs? Because, of course, the super deduction runs out. These are the kind of things that businesses want to look ahead to. Can they hope for that in March?
I think, as I say, it is unlikely we will have the headroom to do that. What businesses want, they do want to cut business taxes. Who wouldn't? I wanted that when I was running my own business. But what businesses want even more than lower taxes is stability. And inflation is a fundamental thread of instability in the economy. It's a worry for households. It stops them spending, and it puts off businesses from investing. So the first thing we have to do is the Prime Minister's plan to halve inflation. That is going to require patience and discipline. When we are able to, no one wants to cut taxes more than I do, but we have to recognise this is the priority for business as well as consumers right now.
It is one of the priorities that you've listed as a government. The US obviously worried about inflation there. They brought in their Inflation Reduction Act. Big subsidies in some shape or form for various industries there. You've said this morning that some elements of that policy worry you. Your colleague Grant Shapps described the policy as dangerous. What is it that worries the UK government about this policy?
Well, we think that if we're going to have the transition to net zero, we should benefit from free and open trade between all the countries that share that ambition, because that will mean we'll get there more quickly, more cost effectively than if we go it alone. So we do have concerns, but we're also very optimistic that the UK will play a leading role in that clean energy transformation. We get 40% of our electricity from renewables. We are second largest in Europe, the largest when it comes to offshore wind.
Will we do our own subsidies, though?
Well, we will announce our plans. I have absolutely no doubt that we will be able to present a package that makes us highly competitive. But I don't think subsidy is necessarily the best way. I think what people want is creativity, innovation, ideas, a climate, a regulatory structure that encourages investment. And if you just look, Anna, at the transformation that we've had in the last 10 years since we started moving away from carbon to renewables, we've done it without those huge subsidies. The US has got a bit of catch up to do because they had an administration that was very sceptical on climate change. I think there's a way that the UK can do very well.
Is there not a danger, though, that we get squeezed in the middle of some kind of subsidy war? If the Americans throw $400 billion at this, if the Europeans are thinking about throwing 300 billion euros at this, how does the UK on its own stand up?
Well, I think it's the wrong way to look at Britain right now to say we're so small and other places are so big. Because when it comes to innovation, nimbleness is a very big advantage, and we have the opportunity to do things differently, quickly, with new regulatory structures. They can make a massive difference to investment in clean energy. The meetings I've had since becoming Chancellor, I've heard of a wall of money that is waiting to invest in UK clean energy. And we just need to make sure that we unlock the barriers that are stopping that happening. Part
of the conversation we're having around subsidies is, of course, because we live in fast-changing geopolitical times, and we seem to be shifting from a world that suited Britain, a very global world, a world of globalisation, to a world that is more multipolar. How does that sit with the UK's strategy?
I would say that the change that we're seeing in the world is one that is a worry for not just Britain but for all democracies, because we're seeing the rise of more assertive autocracies who don't share our values and who tend to have a more mercantilist attitude to trade than we do. And we need to work together with people who share the same values to try and stop that happening. And I think we're more than doing our share of that in terms of our contribution to the defence of Ukraine. And that's important for business too.
You've talked about this not being the time for big tax cuts, but we understand that there are members of your own party that are still calling for tax cuts. Would it be idiotic to expect tax cuts at a time like this?
We don't have the headroom.
And I ask it that way, of course, because the Prime Minister said that the British people are not idiots and that they are not expecting to see tax cuts. So,
well, I think people do understand that we're in a very challenging fiscal situation, that things haven't changed dramatically over the last 3 months since we delivered the autumn statement, which is only 2 months ago. We shouldn't expect there to be a huge change in the situation. But what I was saying today in my comments was that I recognise that lower taxes are part of the vital incentives that encourage people to set up businesses and to invest, and we want to go there. And the difference between us and the Labour Party is that Conservatives bring down taxes when they can. Labour never does, and there is a fundamental difference in our positions.